Yeah, well, the farther away you get from the musician, the less stuff matters. We're so focused on preamps and compressors and EQs nowadays, but in the end, of course, it starts with the guy behind the instrument.
Welcome to the Production Masters Podcast, the philosophies and techniques behind making music according to the masters of music production. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Production Masters Podcast. I'm Owen Gillett and this is episode number 6. This interview is with the Norwegian producer Iver Sandøy. He's probably most famously known for producing the avant-garde black Viking metal band Enslaved, as well as being a producer and a mixing engineer. Iver also does mastering, and he works out of Jupiter Studios and also from Sol Schlotter, which is his own studio. I was really interested in having this conversation because I knew that his approach was to record as live as possible in the studio, and that's the approach that he's taken for the last 3 Enslaved albums. We talked a bit about that and also his approach to mixing the last Enslaved live album. A bit of news about what's coming up as well. Fairly soon I'll be talking to Erman Hamidovic, who's an Australian mixing and mastering engineer. He's mastered the last Devon Townsend album and also Periphery and other stuff as well. I'm looking forward to having that discussion. That's probably going to happen next week. And I've got a couple of other really big guys coming up as well. In the meantime, you can email me at info@productionmasters.net if you want to leave me some feedback or make a request for someone you'd like to hear me interview. And as always, you can subscribe at iTunes, at Stitcher Radio, at Castbox, and also on YouTube, as well as at the main site, which is productionmasters.net. So here it is, a slightly sleep-deprived Owen talking to Mr. Iver Sandøy. All right, welcome everybody back to another Production Masters podcast. And today I'm speaking to Mr. Iver Sandøy. How did I do?
Hey, not bad, not bad.
And all the way from Bergen, right?
That's right.
And how are you this evening in your part of the world?
Doing good. Finished up a few rough mixes on a project I'm working on and some mastering earlier today. And going to see a few concerts later on. So it's a good day.
Awesome. So right, I've tried to dig up some information about what you do, and I've sort of pieced little bits and pieces together, like of the various projects you've done and all the hats you wear for the different production stages, like producing or mixing or whatever it is. But I suppose it makes sense for us to start with you telling us how you got to where you are, like who you are, what you do. How did you get to become a successful metal producer or music producer in general?
Yeah, I would definitely not. I try to shy away from the label metal producer, although I have worked with some well-known metal bands. I'm just terrified of ending up editing bass drums all day long for all through the year. I would. I really like to work with all sorts of music. Yeah, I grew up with metal, as many did from my generation. I'm a 40 plus, and back in the 80s, heavy metal was the thing, you know. But also, I've always listened to Beatles from a very early age. My brother came back from holiday once with the Magical Mystery Tour on cassette, which is kind of a weird place to start with the Beatles. Probably why I'm so fond of weird stuff. I grew up listening to Magical Mystery Tour and thinking that was normal.
I think the Beatles got more interesting as they went on, to be honest. So I don't think that's a bad thing.
Definitely. I guess they got lost in their experiments sometimes, as you do. But
also not a bad thing.
We don't need to. The brilliance of the Beatles have been discussed at length by other people. more in the know than us, I guess. But anyway, that was kind of a starting point for me. I think I was just attracted by the tunes, like anyone else, just the good melodies. That has probably stuck. But as to how I got to be where I am now, I'm doing it full time, so I guess you could call it successful if you define that as being able to live of it.
Oh, look, I think that's absolutely a good definition of success nowadays.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, definitely.
like no
I
mean
guess so.
feat.
So I count myself lucky to be able to do that. But how I got to be there, I guess just I was always the guy rummaging around the rehearsal spaces when we started with the bands, like because I ended up being the drummer because I sucked the most on guitar. So I had to. I ended up
Yeah.
with the back seat, and then
Yeah, right.
Well,
I was going to ask where being a musician, if you were, I wasn't sure if you. I thought you were a musician. I wasn't sure how that came into it as well. But yeah.
yeah, I definitely started, and for years that was my main occupation within the music was as a performing musician. So
Right.
I guess that's also why I've been relatively late. Well, for my age, like doing this full time, the production and engineering side of things, because I was mainly a musician, like for the first 15 years of my dabbling in the music industry. So I was always the guy, like, turning on the PA at the rehearsal space, staying behind when the others left and recording stuff on the cassette player or whatever. Like just experimenting without having any idea of like I have to learn engineering. I was just I'd like to record me playing drums now. I'll put a microphone up and then you just by doing you kind of learn. Oh, it didn't sound so good over there. Maybe we put it here and it sounds better. So
So does that
I actually
mean-
did that from a
did you-
very
does-
early age, but.
Yeah. And so did that end up with you studying audio engineering somewhere, or?
No, it's completely. I'm completely self-taught. Although I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Of course, no one's self-taught. You've been looking over the shoulder of brilliant people that you've been working with and learning from them. Like when you were in the studio recording an album, I was of course always the guy showing up early, being part of everything. From setting up the drums that I had to do and then just staying behind and taking an interest in the mixing and everything. So it's just absorbing information from being in that situation. Making records on your own budget. So I've paid for my education. I paid plenty.
And so how did, because I mean, a lot of people could have been at that stage, but how did you get from there to working with bands and then developing that into where you are now?
I guess that's hard to tell. Maybe I've always been kind of an opinionated bastard. So at some point, someone started taking notice. Oh, yeah, we always has an opinion, and sometimes his opinions work.
Yeah, I think someone probably needs to have an opinion
Yeah.
in these situations, because I mean, a lack of an opinion ends up with stuff not working out, right?
Yeah,
Like you get to a mess. So,
someone has to put the foot down to get stuff moving. Because and it's especially true nowadays, I think, because you could just be stuck in your rehearsal space or in your bedroom with your studio. But let's face it, everyone has a studio, and it's not a problem making anything anywhere. So, but the problem is getting it done. Still, you still need to actually have the drive to put your foot down and say, "Okay, this is it. Let's move on."
and also have a vision for how it's going to be done, so it's not left to random chance, I guess.
Yeah.
So that there's an actual method to what you're going for.
Yeah, and that probably comes down to a bit of experience. We're all learning it kind of anew every time, or at least I try to have that attitude that you're never fully educated in this business. That every time you make an album, it's a different set of rules, because even if it's with the same band as last time and they're making similar music, but it's a different time, we have all aged. There's no stopping that. So I try to view it as a constant learning curve, and every time you feel that you start to master something, then, as you know, you just notice that there was something that you didn't know, and
Absolutely,
that's
of course.
what keeps it interesting.
Would you say you have a production philosophy?
As one of my colleagues in the studio has said repeatedly, it's as easy and as difficult as helping people make the best music they can make. And sometimes that means doing lots of stuff, and other times it means doing very little. I guess it's about trying to trust your instincts more than anything else.
Yeah. I'm sort of interested in eventually taking the conversation towards. I know that you have this idea of liking to record things live, which is the perspective you brought in when you started producing the last couple of Enslaved albums. And I find that really interesting. So I want to find out where that comes from, like how that came about, that you brought that approach in, or why that works for you. Like, because I get the impression that that was your idea to be doing things that way.
Well, kind of. I won't take full credit for it, because I guess they were Enslaved were probably ready to try to do stuff in a kind of different way as well. But at that point, they were really active on the live front, and they were really good live. And I guess that's me coming from a band background, like having been a band musician primarily all my life. Just trying to tap into that chemistry, what happens when you put those people in the same room. Because modern metal tends to, can tend to be very much about precision, and, you know, getting your guitar parts and drum parts very precise, and kind of forgetting about the raw energy of it. It's a very calculated energy in a lot of not just metal, but in a lot of music nowadays. So I just like the randomness, or what that introduces by having people performing or playing at the same time, and those variations, tiny little variations, and little stuff that all those decisions that a band makes instinctively during a, say, 5-minute performance, are probably thousands of tiny little decisions being made consciously and unconsciously, which kind of makes it more interesting, or more gives life to it. So yeah, I do like to record bands live to capture some of that energy, but of course you end up doing a lot of editing afterwards as well. I'm not saying that it's not a dogma. Now we record live and we don't fix anything. Although when that happens, that you get a brilliant take that is just has a lot of flaws but a brilliant energy. Once you start to pick that apart, that energy has a tendency to disappear. So
so there's so many questions I could ask in relation to all of that. I find it really exciting, actually, that approach to tracking as live as possible, like you do, or like you've done with those projects, and it really does bring something else to the sound. It really obviously does. What was I going to say? You're saying the more you edit it afterwards, it sort of dissipates that energy again.
Yeah.
I've just had a brain freeze after all of that.
No problem.
What the hell was I going to say?
Grab another cup of coffee.
I need to fucking wake up. So I suppose that approach do you think that approach works best with a band if they have had a lot of live experience, though? Because presumably if you took that approach with a band who weren't seasoned in that way, it could potentially be a train wreck, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it will work best most of the time with a band that has a lot of live experience. But then again, it can also work brilliantly if you have very good musicians kind of meet for the first time and they have good instincts and react to. I don't necessarily mean technically brilliant musicians, but guys with big ears
Yep.
can actually relate to and listen to what the other guys are doing. So yes, normally the point of recording a band live would be to capture something that they have established as a band, because there's something unique there, I guess, with the chemistry between a set of people. But then again, as with everything in this business, the universal answer is it depends. So,
Absolutely, yeah. That's
so
it. Listening to those last couple of Enslaved albums that were recorded that way, I assume they were both sort of recorded with that approach.
yeah,
Because they really still sound tight. They sound really like they don't sound loose at all.
no. But as I said, to varying degrees, you will end up doing quite a bit of editing as well, and we do a lot of takes. So I kind of mix playlists a lot. Like there was okay, you did this section brilliantly on that take, but I try to use as long a stretch as possible from each take, and we do full takes of the whole song, unless there's a specific part that's problematic that we need to. Okay, we'll do just that again, because I may have a philosophy when it comes to. I think the energy is more natural if you play the whole piece and not just punch in, well, playing as hard as you can or whatever for 2 minutes and then punching in again.
Yeah.
But it worked for Metallica, didn't it? That other approach. They're the biggest band in the world, so who are we to? I remember reading about this when I was a kid, that this was how they did drums like back in the 80s, even the Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets album. Like Lars Ulrich going in and just playing as hard and fast as he could, and when he couldn't do that anymore, they stopped, and then they went back and they punched him in and they did a couple of minutes again in that manner, which is an absurd way of working from my perspective, but it worked for them. My first band was a thrash band back when I was 14, and and then when we were recording demos, it was about, okay, we managed to get through the song without doing without any mistakes. This is the one. But getting back to Enslaved, yes, they do. It's not like those recordings haven't been touched. Of course, there's editing, because you can hear that quite clearly, and probably several rounds of editing.
Obviously not to the point where things have been quantized, though, right?
No. But I still think, well, we try to keep editing to a minimum, but there will be that kind of music still needs to be pretty precise. You can't just fumble along, because it wouldn't have that power.
So question is, how do you determine where the line is between it being tight enough or presentable enough at the level where it needs to be a record, and it's still maintaining the vibe? How do you find the place where you're comfortable going, I'm comfortable with that, I can sign off on that? I mean, as a producer, how do you determine where the line is with that?
Well, I guess it's a combination of just feeling that energy from a take and just doing a quick analysis of, okay, we really liked that take and it had a great energy. Let's just check if the bass drums are tight enough, or if when things are mixed and everything becomes clearer, and if it will still hold up. and you kind of start to work on it a bit, maybe just to see if that energy holds up when you start to fiddle with the timing at at given spots. And normally it's just a few, like you get a little flam, or the bass drum drifts from the snare drum a bit, those kind of things. But yeah, when it comes down to it, you just try to keep as much of that take that you got a good feeling from, even though it drifts from the click or whatever.
So you're relying on instinct to tell you when it's right, or when it needs to be pulled in.
Yeah, but if I'm in doubt, of course you do refer to like the grids, and because there are certain things that you just know will work in a certain way once it's placed on grid, or slightly behind, or slightly on top of the beats. And yeah, but for the main feeling of things, for instance, there's a long stretch on the new album that we just did that just had a great energy. And when I started looking into it and just checking, well, how tight is it, and it wasn't like the tightest stretch, but there's just something with the way the notes are placed on the guitars and bass and drums that just gives it a feel that I don't think would be the same if it was quantized and like made cleaner. I don't know if that answered your question, but it comes down to a lot of instincts, and it's difficult to say what determines how that works, because it's not a constant. Well, I haven't been able to recognize a constant anyway.
So it is almost intangible. It's almost just the feeling you get when you hear it.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, it must be partly experience as a producer as well, right?
Yeah, partly, but I guess also just trying to be a good listener, like a music enthusiast. That's more the musical side of what we do. Just try to, well, hopefully you don't even need to try to do it, but rely on those instincts that tell you, oh, this is great music, without going into constantly checking the levels and watching the grids, and just listen to what comes out of the speakers. And and that can be hard to do nowadays when everyone's doing multitasking on the production side, because let's face it, most of us are doing both the producing and the engineering. And
absolutely,
with the Enslaved guys, of course, that's a co-production thing. So the production team, we all have to kind of sign off on it, being happy with what has happened. So it's not just me determining. I guess it has happened that I thought something was great and the other two guys didn't, and okay, so we try something else. And
I'm curious,
and that's good. That's good as well.
So when you're listening back, do you ever flick the screen off so you're just listening, you're not seeing anything, or?
I try to do that as often as possible, yeah. But
or you just try to not look at the screen, because obviously some people can get into the habit of, watching the music instead of listening to the music as well.
Yeah, either just switch off the screen, or just I tend to just wander off looking out the window or something.
Yeah.
Do something like focus away from the mixing desk and the damn screen that we keep staring into at all hours.
Yeah, that's it. We need it, but we've got to keep it at arm's length as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're recording a band live in the studio, like trying to capture everything at once, presumably everybody's on headphones.
Normally, yes. But actually, it's funny you should ask that. Just now, the other weekend, I recorded a young band. Really, they're really new to the whole studio thing, and they haven't really done anything before. But a local band that I thought was, I think they're really cool. Just guys in their early 20s, like around 20. And we can bond over the 1970 Black Sabbath Paris concert. Like they're really into that, and they just have great energy in the rehearsal space when they play together. And it's a power trio with a vocalist. Yeah. So I just said, "Oh, fuck it, come into the studio and we'll set it up as a rehearsal space, and you guys just play without headphones." and of course then you do the
Yep.
vocals as an overdub because we wanted to work a bit on that. But yeah, so just a week ago I did the exact well, as far as I guess it's logical to go in today's world, away from that, headphones and click tracks, and it was just 3 guys in a room, pretty tight together, with amps blasting into the drum kit, everything.
I was going to ask that. I was going to ask if you were just allowing Spill just to do what it does and not get hung up on Spill and
Because
all that.
I was thinking I just set them up. This is here in my studio, which is quite small actually. The room is probably like 20 square meters. The recording
Okay.
space, and I use that to rehearse all the time as well with the bands that I still play with.
Mhm.
So it's kind of set up as a rehearsal space / recording space.
So what's the name of that studio? What's the name of your studio?
That's called Solslottet Studio. It means the castle
Sure.
of the sun.
Right. Yeah.
Don't we'll,
Awesome. I won't try to pronounce that one.
No,
'cause
we
I'll
we
slay
don't
it,
need
so-
to. We don't need to go into that.
Yeah.
But anyway, with those young guys, I was thinking I may need to. I'll just set them up and they can start to make noise, and I'll listen in the control room, and I'll probably have to put some baffles up and make it a bit more separated. But
And it turned out well with a good energy.
yeah, I just ended up saying, well, fuck it, this is great. Just press record and we'll go. Because they were doing,
Yep.
they had a really small budget, so they needed to just record everything and get the finished EP in a weekend. So we did that. They came in on Saturday and went out again on Sunday with their EP mastered and ready.
And that's a really cool thing about that type of recording, though. If the band is polished enough to pull it off, is you can record a whole lot of stuff really fast, can't you? So
Yeah. And that was the
And-
kind of energy with those young guys that were really excited about being in the studio. And I find that refreshing when you work with people my age. They have a lot of experience, but that drive and that enthusiasm is, I won't say that it's gone, but of course it takes on a different kind of energy once you get more experienced and the whole novelty of it wears off. So it's great to have young guys coming in and just to remind you of maybe how you felt when you went into the studio for the first time and wow, yeah, let's do this.
I guess it's a reminder that music is about energy and experience and excitement. I mean, it's about, that's what you do it, to be stimulated in some way, to feel something exciting, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
if it was boring, you wouldn't go there to bore yourself, would you? So
No, totally.
mean-
And to me, it's hopefully it's not about the business side of things. So if things turn out to be successful, that's a bonus. But to not go home and kill yourself after a week's work just out of boredom, like you said, it needs to have some kind of energy and some a drive, and you get joy from
you
it.
see, I think we've all seen musicians and bands that get to that point. You've seen them live, or you listen to their albums even, and you just go, "Oh, it's just like, they might be technically, you know, great and doing everything right, but it's just it's impossible to get enthusiastic." You know what I mean? Like, I think it's where U2 has ended up and where Coldplay's at and all those kind of bands. It's just like, I mean, well, and probably other good metal bands that are good. It's just sometimes. Yeah, that factor seems to just be, you know, they'd probably rather be at home, you know, doing something with the family or something. You just get that vibe,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
Not that there's,
and
the
it's
two obviously aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, you can have a family and all that, and then just cross into being focused in the music zone. So I mean, it just comes down to, I guess, where people's vibe is at, whether they've kept that fresh vibe for their music, whether they're still inspired by their music, I guess.
And that's hard. It must be hard to keep that enthusiasm and that drive like solely towards the music once what you do is a big business and you need to like just keep the ball rolling on the business side.
then-
you need to make a new album. Well, do you really want to make a new album? Or you
For
need
sure.
you need to go on that world tour, but do you really want to?
I think the point of that is it's so obvious when a band has reached that point where, and it's even worse when they try to go, oh, someone said we need to shake this up, we need to make it sound like going back to our roots, and they're trying to recapture that, and it just never sounds like what it should be. It just feels, you can just feel it. It just feels it's trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. You know what I mean?
That's the most pathetic thing is people my age and up trying to reconnect with the energy they had when they were 20. It just never works. I love it when you read the old quotes from John Lennon when his last album was Double Fantasy, right? The last one the one that got released just before he was killed. That was kind of his comeback at 40. And he was just, well, I don't care. I'm 40 years old. I'm making music as a 40-year-old for 40-year-olds. And if other people enjoy it, then good. But I'm not trying to be like the 20-year-old John Lennon screaming his nuts off. This is the music I make now because I'm the guy that I am now. And more people should embrace that.
But it's funny, some people they can still do the same kind of thing. Like the vibe of Enslaved still seems fresh and authentic. You know what I mean? I know they've developed a long way from their earlier career, but they seem authentic. Bands like Motorhead, even they were still sort of doing the same thing late in their career, it still seemed fresh and authentic. So I think it's about whether someone is honest and in tune with their essence. You know what I mean?
Well, luckily the world is full of exceptions. So, as when we go on about things being this way or that way, there will always be exceptions.
Absolutely true. So, relating that back to the studio, I was trying to hold on to the question before we got too far away from it. But
sorry.
When you are recording all at once with a band like Enslaved, where it does need the precision still with the guitars, are you actually recording direct and then reamping, or when you're doing it live, are you recording cabinets when you do the live recording?
Both.
Yeah.
Again, you always, just to have the opportunity afterwards to reamp, you always record the DI signal. And that makes it so much easier to edit as well, of course. Having just
right, yeah.
Like visually.
Mm-hmm. Because different people have got different ideas about how the guitarist plays in response to whether they're hearing an amp simulator when they're playing, or if it's actually the amp, where the speakers are compressing and the valves are compressing relative to how the guitar's being played. So do you find that the musicians respond with their performance differently, whether they're playing through a real amp or if it's an amp simulator?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would think so. So I do like to have the amps rigged up, and whether or not they will be used or to what degree they will be used later varies, I guess. But it's good to have them rigged up just to move some air. But again, it depends. When it's the basic rhythm guitar of a metal recording, maybe it doesn't matter that much. Just for the riffing, once you're in the room with the drums and on headphones anyway, I'm not sure that if people are honest, if they can really tell the difference in the response. But yeah, I guess there are people are more or less connected to the way their amplifier responds to the touch on the guitar, and some people don't mind as much.
So the amplifiers are isolated from where the drums are being recorded, though?
Yeah.
They're in like separate booths or something?
Yeah, they are in booths anyway. So it's not...
Yeah.
We're not recording with full leakage with a band like Enslaved, no. It's still... Yeah. You can still keep like full separation.
Yep, cool. So I'm just referring to my list of questions here. I'll try to be prepared. Otherwise, we'll talk for 3 hours and... So I've got lots of questions about the work you've done with Enslaved, because I suppose that's how I've become aware of your work.
Yeah, it's probably the most well-known act that I've worked with, I guess.
So you knew the guys before you were working with them, though?
Yes, I guess we started hanging out like maybe early, like around 2000, like 99, 2000, around there.
I think you said you were doing drum teching for one of their earlier albums. Is
Yeah,
that right?
that was in 2003, and we had known each other for a few years then. Kind of, yeah, we started off hanging out at the same bars and, doing the odd thing together, with different bands, playing at the same stages, and yeah, just getting to know each other, and through I guess also through the Hole in the Sky festival. It was a local festival in Bergen that went on for quite a few years. One of the very first like extreme metal festivals in Norway. Well, Ivar, he was quite involved in organizing the festival. I performed there with a couple of different bands, even played in a Black Sabbath tribute band, so they could have
No joke, you're right.
so they could have Hole in the Sky open their festival.
Oh, wicked. So I'm assuming that you learnt about drum teching from being a drummer. That seems obvious.
Yes.
And you would, whenever you're recording drums, you take care of your own drum teching?
Yes.
Your tuning and whatever else has to happen?
Yeah, and I still, people still call me. I do that a bit, help people out in other studios as well. And can you help us out with this drum kit? And just, I sometimes just go in and tune drums for people, not having anything more to do with the recording than that. So it's also a skill set that comes in really handy in this line of work. It's a complex instrument to get to sound good. So the earlier you get it to sound good, the better. Because, yeah, you can do all sorts of stuff with the mixing and samples and all that crap. But if you have a good drummer,
yeah,
and a good instrument, it's a cliche, but it is a cliche for a reason.
That's right. It seems simplistic, but it really is true, isn't it? That if you get the kit sounding great before you've even pulled out any mics, and you got someone that knows how to hit it, that's how much of the job done already is that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the farther away you get from the musician, the less stuff matters. Like, we're so focused on preamps and compressors and EQs nowadays, but in the end, of course, it starts with the guy behind the instrument or the guy behind the keyboard producing his music on the laptop.
It's something that drives me nuts about listening to metal bands nowadays, though, is I swear to God, every drum kit now, when someone posts a band, listen to this, it's like the drums sound the same on every recording. Well, like the same snare sound at every hit, the same kick.
Yeah, well, it's not their sound.
It's not that it's bad. It's just the fucking same every band. It's like there's one drum kit that exists in the entirety of the world or something, you know. And
I guess they are
like,
not.
Come on, guys.
They are not the drums in Bergen or in somewhere in Bulgaria anymore. They are all Steven Slate's drums.
Yeah, which like is not it's not that it's bad at all. It's just that there's no character, no individual character to it, which just I think is just boring. You know, like it'd be so much more exciting. And I was saying this, can't remember who I was saying it to now, but for better or for worse, going back to the 90s, if you listen to Roadrunners bands, you know, each band had a different sound and had completely different sounding production. You know, there'd be lots of variation between all of it. And maybe without the internet, no one really knew what other people were doing when they were mixing or tracking their stuff. So there was a lot more variation. And obviously sonically, maybe we can improve on some of those sounds, but I reckon you'd agree. It would be nice to get back to a place where people go for a bit more variation, a bit more individual, natural sound, where everyone has their own sound.
I do agree. It's kind of become a template of some kind of. It has to sound a certain way to be perceived as a good sound.
That's it. I think part of it is the quest for people wanting quality in their sound and wanting it to have this professional sheen that competes with X, Y, Z. But and it's not the quality of it that's the problem. It's the. I'm sure that people are going to say these things in years to come and just wonder why it was like it was. But
Yeah, like the drum sounds from the 80s or early 90s.
it totally,
people are going.
it absolutely is. Yeah,
Well, that
100% is.
that has got a revival now, so everything goes in circles anyway. But yeah,
Yeah,
I would love a bit of variation, but it's almost become like in what's mainstream metal production nowadays. It almost said there's no leeway to allow that kind of variation, because once things start to sound kind of weird and thumpy and doesn't have that same attack or whatever that those sample drums have, people grow uneasy. Because, well, this doesn't really sound competitive.
that's right. It's all those things, the social consciousness of it doesn't, yeah, that's right. It's all those things. And it's gotten far away from, that's like what a drum kit really sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what does a snare really sound like? You know what I mean? Like, what does it really sound like?
Let's face it, in metal production, a drum kit hasn't really sounded like a drum kit in a really long time. I mean, Master of Puppet, that doesn't really sound like a real drum kit.
Yeah, it still has a sort of breaking a celery stalk for the snare drum,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Look, this is partly why I wanted to chat with you, because I thought, you know,
Well,
we kind
let's
of
let's
feel
ask
the
that.
same way about these things.
Let's return that question to you then. Do you feel that there is more of that energy in or identity in the Enslaved albums, or do you feel that they fall into the same category production-wise?
I think I can tell after the mix process, a lot of the variation gets smoothed out. You know, a lot of the texture of the drums has had the samples added in, so it becomes, I guess it's splitting the difference between it being more organic, but also still having some amount of that processed modern sound brought into it. So I would be happy to hear it without any samples in it and without any of that. I'd love to hear it just like great, beautifully recorded sounds, which I'm sure they are, and just even less of that professional sheen that's sort of added onto it.
Yeah.
And still have it great quality. But that said, I mean, it sounds great. It sounds great. There's nothing funny about it. I could definitely handle hearing it even more, even a few notches back, even more natural, back to the actual organic drum sounds.
Yeah, well, it would be but it would take. I guess it would take some brave people to actually do like a big production and just embrace those sounds.
I think that would be really exciting, especially when it's
I guess,
a type of music that's just not done. Yeah.
No, but I guess something like that wasn't really a metal album anymore, like Heritage by Opeth. I guess those sounds were pretty natural. It's not one of my favorite albums, but
I completely agree.
That
though.
did sound
I
really
love the
old
fact
school,
that
didn't it?
You get the sense that you're hearing air being moved. You're not hearing samples and excessive amounts of all of the rest of it. Yeah.
And I think also one of the reasons why people are using sample enhancements so much, but not the only reason, of course, but one of the reasons is that it's so easy. It gets you where you want to end up quicker. And with the budgets that we have today, you need to get where you're going fast, because there's no time to, like, I remember reading about, was it Scorpions or whatever, sometime back in the 80s, they spent 3 weeks getting the drum sound.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I would love to have that kind of budget, although it would probably get boring pretty fast. But I don't even know, how do you spend 3 weeks getting drum sounds? It must be a lot of experimenting and going back and forth and moving microphones and recording and, oh no, let's go back just endlessly.
So there's a good question then. Like, how long does it take you to set up a great sounding drum kit, get the kit sounding awesome, get it mic'd up, and have the sounds pulled? How long does it take for you to do that and for it to be at like great quality?
Well, of course, it will be different from Kato's kits with Enslaved, which is a huge kit.
Because it's huge.
To a 4-piece. But I still tend to use quite a few microphones just because they're available, I guess.
Sure. Why not?
Although on a small kit, you'd be better off using fewer mics and get that to work. But that's also a part of the getting there faster. You just throw up some microphones and you can do that, make that decision later. Maybe you're not going to use both the pair of Coles and the Neumanns for overheads, but they're both there, and we'll just see. But to answer your question, like a normal working day for me, I start in the morning with setting everything up, and the goal is always to have a complete take of the first song by the end of that day. Complete with the, if we're recording a live band, it should be at least one song with drums, guitars, and bass in the can. The end of that working day.
And that's assuming that drum sound would be absolutely high enough quality to be used without adding samples in, though, right?
Yeah.
So really, that shouldn't be a factor. Like it shouldn't be an issue. People having time to get a good drum sound.
No, exactly. I never think thoughts like, oh, this bass drum doesn't really sound good, but you know what? It's going to be sample replaced anyway, so I don't care. You try to make that drum kit sound as good as possible, even though you know at some point it will be sample enhanced or replaced. I even do that as a drummer. I use samples, but always mixed in. I don't replace. I just enhance, and that's just another set of EQ and compression, in my opinion. But as long as you use it to enhance the sound that's already there, hopefully you're able to keep the character in the drums that you are recording, not the drums that Stephen Slate recorded.
Yes, indeed.
And not to slag him off, I use his trigger. It's actually very, very good. So
I mean, and this is the thing: there shouldn't necessarily be a blanket rule of you can't use anything if you need to use it. You know, that's different, isn't it?
Well, that's not productive. You use whatever tools that you have available to make the end result as close to what you envisioned as possible.
Yeah, totally.
Or maybe you end up using some tool that sets you off on a different path. It makes you end up in a totally different place from where you originally envisioned it. That's also fine and can be lots of fun. You start off trying to make something happen and you end up chasing something completely different.
That's evolution for you, isn't it, though? Mistakes add up to being sometimes the tangent they go on produces some kind of golden result. So
yeah.
Which you couldn't predict.
It's not a revolutionary thought. People have, this is the way music has been made forever. So we just have to allow that to set the working conditions so that can happen. And of course, it is harder to make that happen when you record everything to a click track and all the song structures are set and you do the drums. And if at some point later on you discover, maybe it should have been a bit different, then it's a big hassle to change that around. Well, you have to do those things more in the pre-production stage then, I guess. But once you're recording the whole band, you can do those changes in the studio. Hey, let's do something else in that bar there, or just change stuff up, and everyone follow the drums in some way or another towards the end of that section there. And that's where you get the magic from. To go back to the live performance aspect, you can actually do changes on the fly much more easily than if you have the way stuff's normally done now. My impression is that the drummer comes in and does his bit, and then you start doing the bass. And I never really done it in that way much, because I always try to get people to perform live if they're interested in that kind of recording anyway.
Yep. I think it's a beautiful thing. So I was also going to ask you, in regard to pre-production, how early in the pre-production do you get involved with Enslaved? And what's your role when there's pre-production going on? Is it partly technical or partly creative, or can you give us an outline of what your role would be there?
I get sent the demos. Ivar writes all the music. So so it's more about it's at some point demos starts to get sent around, and people voice their opinions. Well, me and Grutle anyway. If there are any changes that you would propose, or just having discussions, that section there, maybe we should do those kind of sounds, or it depends again. But with Enslaved, I get involved on the demo stage.
So listening to arrangements and that type of thing.
Yeah, I often get to hear stuff before the vocal sections are ready. So start like before that stuff is added.
And this is with programmed drums. These are like early demos you're talking about.
Yeah. Like with from Ivar's home studio with I don't know what he uses. Probably Easy Drummer. But it sounds. Well, it's scary. It's scary how good it sounds. You know, those
totally
demos nowadays. It's just I probably wouldn't lift an eyebrow if that was presented to me as someone's album, and it probably is all the time.
Someone asked me to listen to their band the other day, and I went and listened to it, and that line has completely blurred now. Trying to hear, I wasn't sure if I was going to offend them by saying, "Is this your demos or is this meant to be your finished album?" And really, it was like seriously, it was impossible to tell. Is that a real drummer, or is that because it sounded completely gridded? But is that a real drummer, or is that like a good fake drum kit? Yeah, it's strange getting to that place. And that's even more, I'm going on the same soapbox, but that's why even better if everybody did record getting their own sound, compromising a bit of it doesn't have to be, even if the quality is slightly less, I mean, have your own sound.
At least it doesn't sound like the other guy's demo.
Exactly. So in terms of the technical pre-production, when you're working with a band like Enslaved, how much do you do? Is it like a mental preparation, or do you actually write out, I think we're going to need these mics, or I'm going to need these amps, or what's your process for the technical pre-production for an album like that?
Yeah, I guess it's more, I don't write stuff out now, but it's more about thinking through what mics I have available in the studio, and that's what we use. It will vary at some. If I don't have the stereo pair that I used on the last album because one of them is broken and is in for service, then I'll use something else. So you just, at any given week when you start recording, you just have to use what's available. And luckily we have quite a lot of microphones. So if the favorite microphone is being serviced, then you can always find something else that will do the job. Like for the last album, I've been using different microphones for the bass drums, for instance. But for the one that we did now, I actually ended up using, for front of kick, AKG's 414, which I'd never used much.
Really?
I'd never used much before because I'd never been that fond of them. But those were the ones that we had available, like 2 microphones that we could put in front of the bass drums. So, and it worked fine, no problem.
And how far in front of the bass drum did you put?
Yeah, pretty close. Not like roomy sound. It's just to get more of a fuller sound than the SM7 in the hole is what I use normally for the bass drum.
Right, okay. Interesting. So putting the 414 down there, is that to grab more of the woof of the bottom end, or is it getting some attack, using the attack as well?
No, mostly for the woof, yeah.
And what do you use for the attack?
Well, the SM7.
Oh, so that's
so they're
sitting right in the hole.
Yeah, I think I prefer the more woody knock I get from that to, but there's click in there, like a high-end click if you just EQ it in there. So I think that works great as a bass drum mic. I often use just that for the bass drum as well. If
SM7s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any preferences for overheads? Like, do you prefer small diaphragm or large diaphragm mics, or?
I've used the KM 184s a lot on Kato, like a spaced pair, because that just seems to be a good representation of, like, they kind of end up being cymbal mics on a production like that anyway. So, but I use them as a spaced pair, and then maybe or most of the time a tube mic, like a large diaphragm mic in mono, like over the snare, like a mono overhead with a bit more character to it. But then again, in the case of Enslaved, well, since I just provide the raw material for the mix that Bogren does. So I'm not sure how many of those microphones he actually uses in the mix, but for stuff that I'm mixing myself, I would probably use quite a lot of that mono overhead, just to because that's where a lot of the character lies. And also like a front of kit. I've done that with Kato's kit quite a lot. The front of kit stereo paired with the Coles.
Sure.
That could also be also great results. Just a mono something between the bass drums and getting a good balance between the bass drums and the snare drum.
That's kind of working as like a close room mic.
Yeah.
And what about for like more of an ambient room mic? You're further away. Do you do more distant room miking for the more of the dimension of the kit?
Yeah, I often. Well, most of the time with Enslaved, there are two pairs of room mics. For instance, kind of semi-close room, one on each side, U47 type. We have the Perlmans. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Perlman makes like a U47 tribute kind of microphone. They're really and we have two of those. I have one, and the big studio has one. So those or. We also have some of the old Gefell, the East German UM57s.
Yeah, nice.
Those are also nice for room, and the Gefell.
So they're not too bright, those mics. Then
no,
would they be smoother in the top end or something?
Yeah, a bit smoother, but there is plenty of high end to get out of them if you want to. It can be easily EQ'd in.
They're just nice, really nice quality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the Gefell 930s. They have like tiny microphones. I think they're probably large diaphragm or something in between. I'm not too sure. They're nice sounding, quite mid-rangey, but good for room mics.
For room mics.
Yeah, and sometimes just a pair of ribbon mics as a room mic as well, just to see if that made me happy on that particular day. Just the room mics are more. You can try different stuff and see what works.
Yeah, totally. And do you have any secret weapons for your snare miking or your mic choices or anything like that?
No, not really. We go-to snare mic in the last 4 or 5 years has been the boiling mod for the 57. Where you actually
I have no idea what that is.
No, you should look it up. You actually. You take out the transformer in the 57, and to do it, you have to put it in a pot of boiling water. To just
no shit.
No, it's obviously you have to take the top off, so you don't boil the whole microphone, but just the part with the transformer in it. And it actually
that sounds insane.
Yeah, you take that out, and it drops like 10 dBs in output. And you have to be very careful not to put phantom power onto it, because that will just fry the membrane.
Right.
But we did some testing with a stock 57 versus the boiled 57, and it actually ends up being, it doesn't turn into an SM7, but it's almost as if a normal 57 has its shoulders kind of hitched up like this, kind of narrow, bitey quality, which makes it a brilliant microphone, and that's why it works so well on so many sources. It's the same microphone with a boil mod, but it kind of lets its shoulders down a bit. So
it's a bit fatter.
Yeah, a bit fatter, just not as strained in a way.
Okay. Wow, that's really interesting.
You should check it out. They're pretty cheap microphones.
Definitely will.
So that's what I've been using for a snare microphone.
Wow, that's cool. I'm glad I asked. And
of course, then there are the different preamps that you use. But we have some quite a few of the old Siemens, the 276 preamps, and those get used for bass drum and snare drum quite a lot, because they just seem to add a nice fat quality to things. But it's not that important. But I guess everything matters in
Well, I suppose the little things add up, don't
Yeah, they do.
Do everything right. What about hi-hat? Do you ever mic it, or is it a case of trying to get it out of everything?
Um, it's not that big a problem with a kit like Kato's, because his hi-hat ends up being so far away from the snare drum that
Yeah,
we
Do you
do
ever-
put the microphone on that and the ride cymbal,
sure.
and I just use a 57 or a 58.
Okay. Oh, wow. All right. Have you ever, when you're recording a band, had to make them change their hi-hats to a smaller pair that are a bit more containable, or a bit more that aren't just messing through the whole sound? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, good thing being a drummer, and I was quite active in collecting drum equipment for quite a few years. So I have a good collection of cymbals and drums. So if someone comes in with a hi-hat that just doesn't sound good, it's quite quickly switched for one of mine, yeah.
And would the reason for switching it, though, be that the one they've got is too loud? Or is it just that it sounds like shit?
A combination, I guess.
Mhm.
Quite
I
often.
suppose,
Most often when it's problematic, it's because it's too heavy and clanky. And
okay.
but it could also be like a small hi-hat, like a 13-inch, or and just sounding too nice. If you want something with a bit more grit, you can put a bigger and thinner hi-hat to get more wash, or just a more trashy quality to it.
And I suppose the same principle applies across with the other cymbals as well, wanting them to be all having the right tone relative to each other as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Because sometimes one might be harsh and you change that before you start recording. Would you do that?
I do that quite often. It's a very common problem that people have one cymbal that just, this doesn't sound like it's part of the same kit. So you need something softer or whatever.
Or sometimes there may just be harsh frequencies that are coming through
Yeah.
as well. Do you find that?
Yeah.
And you want to deal with that not in the mix?
Well, if you can fix it before the microphone, that's of course always better.
Totally.
So yeah, it's good to have a collection, and it's not just cymbals and drums, but have a couple of available amps and guitars and stuff that you know work in a certain way. If there are tones that you kind of envision that you want to get into the recording, then if people come in and don't have those tones available in their equipment, and guitarists are most of the time quite happy to try different guitars, because that's just a new axe, and it get something fresh out of their playing. And nowadays drummers too, of course they want to go into the studio and get to use their own gear, because that's part of the attraction. I find that most people I work with quite happy to try different stuff, because it's something else, it's something new to perform on, that maybe pulls out a different kind of performance from them.
Yeah, I guess, and it probably inspires a bit of
Exactly.
excitement in the studio and all that.
I guess that was what I was getting to as well. That in the best instances, it's not just about problem solving. It can also be to inspire a different kind of performance. Like, okay, you have a really, really heavy ride cymbal there. If we switch it for another one that's thin and more responsive to your playing, then maybe you would start playing in a different way. And quite often people do, of course. Yeah, so
That's interesting. Yeah. Because my idea of changing bits of drums over has always been to try to solve a problem, not actually from the perspective of trying to inspire the performance to be different. So that's really interesting. I guess it's an experienced producer's perspective, or maybe it's a drummer's perspective as well.
yeah, maybe, but let's be honest. Most of the time, it starts off as being solution to a problem, and then
Yes.
and then in the next instance, this actually sounded very nice, and how about you play a bit more like this? And yeah. In an ideal world, you try to get all those solution to problems to actually become better than what it was supposed to be in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it feeds into the creativity as well. Something that I've been wanting to touch on, one of the last things you did was mixed the live album
Yeah.
for Enslaved, right?
Yeah.
Can you walk us through the process of how that was done? Like I'm assuming you received the files on a hard drive, and then what was the process like walking through mixing it and then it becoming the finished product that you would have sent for mastering?
Yeah, well, it's not that different from a normal mix, but yeah, you get the file sent just a download link nowadays, and then just start to try and get an overview of what's available in there, what's on the different tracks. And for instance, that recording, I can't really remember. I think it was actually there was only one ambient microphone, which makes it a bit difficult to really get that live energy through.
Yeah, so there was no audience mics?
I think the one ambient mic must have been somewhere near the front of house position and pointing towards the stage, and then you don't get so much of the audience reactions. Yeah, but other than those, you kind of feel like you're missing a few things that you would want to have to get it to sound authentic or whatever, and then you just start to work with what you have and make it as energetic and hopefully bringing back a bit of the experience of being there. Although it can never be that. It can never be the same as being there, because you have so many other factors at a gig. But yeah, so you just try to do something else with it.
Ambience is important, isn't it?
Yeah,
having something that represents the ambience of the from what the audience was hearing is really helpful to mix in, isn't it? Though, if you can have it.
So let's put it like this: I really had to rely quite heavily on that one audience microphone and compress the crap out of that, and also get a bit of the vocal microphones on stage, or at least the ones that were on the front of the stage. When the guys were not shouting into them, you can take a bit of them and get a bit of audience from those.
So when you received the files, they hadn't already been edited or anything like that?
No, it was just the raw files, the recording. And actually,
how much editing was done in terms of was any editing done in terms of the performance?
I have to try to remember. No, I don't think so, because there were quite a bit more like speaking and segues between songs and stuff that we edited out because it didn't make sense.
Sure,
that should be reserved for the concert, because on an album that just ends up sounding dull.
It just sounds like it's a long time before the next song starts. Yeah.
Exactly. So a bit of that was taken out, and there was also one song that didn't make it to the album, the first song, because they had some issues with, there were some tracks lacking, and so actually the first song of the performance didn't make it onto the album because we didn't have the full guitar performance, and yeah.
So they weren't interested in overdubbing things or trying to fix stuff?
No. Well, there were, of course, that was always an option if there was some crisis with the vocals, and I think they were prepared to fix stuff if that was necessary. But once I started working on it, I kind of figured that there's no need to fix anything, and just work with what's there, and as long as the guys can live with their performances, that will differ from the albums, of course.
Oh, really? So it's a 100% live album, is it?
As far as I can remember, yeah. But when we get into the case with the drums again, of course, I did sample enhancement of the live drums just to, the budget wasn't. This was not something that I could sit and work on for weeks on end, and it just gets you there quicker. Yeah. So the drums are just sample enhanced ever so slightly, and that gives you more of that feeling when you're in the room listening to those drums coming out of the PA, because that's not natural either. Those
of course,
those drums are enhanced as hell with a 200,000 watt PA.
Yeah, absolutely, and the amount of dialed up 80 hertz that's like rearranging your internal organs and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not actually what it sounds like in the room.
Yeah. And of course, there wasn't any of the actual effects on vocals and the delays and stuff. So that wasn't from the live performance. That had to be added.
Recreated.
Yeah. But yeah, so
So-
it's
so-
it's a totally live album. For not that it really, I'm not necessarily of the opinion that it needs to be. I mean, we all love live albums that have been touched up on.
I love it when I hear mistakes
Yeah, yeah,
on live albums. Like I don't really want to hear mistakes on a studio album so much, but if it's a live album, every now and again, if you hear something, it's exciting. I think a little thing where, like on the last Motorhead live album that just came out, there's actually a couple of big boo boos on one of the songs, and it's just left in. So, I mean,
yeah. And
it's like, oh, it is live. That's cool. Wicked.
I do hope you can hear that on the Enslaved live album as well. You can hear the drums dragging a bit here and there, and
Yeah.
not the guitars are not super clean. They're kind of the way a guitar is being played when you headbanging like hell, and
Yeah,
and
that's wicked.
and the vocals are croaking a bit every now. They're not as like monumental in every single spot as on the album. More like like barking like 40 centimeters away from the microphone instead of actually doing like the well adjusted thing right
And
up
if you
to
could go and have a 5-minute break and come back and roar with the same intensity for the next section, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
when it's all got to be done at once, and then the next song and the next song, that's the reality of it. Performance has to be economized sometimes like that. Or,
yeah. So it's bound to influence the whole the whole performance that you. Okay, that was the first song, and then on to the next 50 minutes. You can't blow all
Exactly.
your energy. Yeah, like you said.
I haven't actually picked that album up yet, but I'm really looking forward to getting it and having a good listen to it. Yeah, I'm totally looking forward to grabbing
Yeah.
a copy
Great.
when I can.
Do look forward. There are some really nice sections in there. Like was my personal favorite maybe the live version of Convoys. That's really because of course with live albums, like generally for me the most interesting aspects are where you get a different perspective on some of the music from farther back. So
For sure.
in this instance, they just released the In Times album. So maybe the most interesting parts are not the songs
The latest material.
the latest material, because that will sound the most similar to the album. But when you get to the older songs, that get you get to hear them with a totally different sound, and maybe they have adjusted their performances a bit, and they focus a bit differently on the song, and that's the interesting bit about the live albums, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very cool. Well, we've been talking for about an hour and a half, so
Wow! Yeah,
time has flown.
excellent. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for all your time and the awesome chat. It's really great.
It was great talking to you. I had a good time.
All right, man. All the best. We'll catch you later.
Yeah, catch you later. Bye.
Okay, bye.